So in this video I'm going to be coming on to the managers that I think United should avoid, but first in regards to Erik Ten Hag, I think if he wants to have any chance of retaining his job going into next season under the new INEOS regime, he needs to solve two main tactical issues and make one big concession. And this is because of two main reasons. The first is obviously with the new INEOS regime coming in, there is always going to be some uncertainty around the manager because of course that regime didn't appoint him. And with the structure above the Manchester United manager about to change radically going into next season, with the likes of Omar Barada, Dave Brailsford, Dan Ashworth and maybe even someone like Paul Mitchell all coming in, meaning that even if Erik Ten Hag did manage to solve those tactical issues from now to the end of the season, if he's not willing to make some concessions to his role, then INEOS may feel that he's just not the right style of manager for Manchester United going forward. And as I'm going to come on to later on in this video, maybe someone like De Zerbi, Unai Emery, Xabi Alonso, or maybe even the less talked about names like Hansi Flick, Thomas Tuchel, or even Graham Potter could be deemed as a better option for United. But what exactly are these two main tactical issues that Ten Hag needs to solve, as well as a big concession that he may have to make? Well, I did analyse in depth the defensive tactical issue that Ten Hag's United are facing in the analysis videos I did after the Luton and Aston Villa games, as well as looking at how I would solve this tactical issue in another video where I spoke about potentially moving Casemiro into the back line to play a back five in the middle and defensive thirds. I won't go into the tactical side too much in this video, but I'll leave all of those three videos linked in the description. But in short, the main issue that United are experiencing from a defensive point of view is in that left-sided half space, where they keep getting overloaded in the centre of midfield, going man-to-man in their midfield three, meaning that when the opposition side use a box midfield in possession, as both Luton and Aston Villa did, that lot on the right side is constantly being left in a 2v1 situation. Now Ten Hag doesn't have to go with my tactical resolution of moving to a 5-4-1 in the middle and defensive thirds, but he is going to have to solve this issue one way or another, particularly when we come up against better sides, and certainly into next season if we want to get anywhere close to challenging for the title. But before I come on to the second tactical issue that Ten Hag has to solve, if you like me like to reminisce on the days where we had legitimately not just the best manager in world football, but in my opinion the best manager of all time in Sir Alex Ferguson, then head over to Jersey FIFA. They've got all the retro Manchester United jerseys through the 90s and 2000s, as well as from other club and international sides as well. If you use code Atlantis at checkout you'll get a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which will be linked in the description. So the second tactical issue that Ten Hag has to solve is United's ability to break down deep compact defensive units, because currently United are far too reliant on quick transitional attacks, which whilst are effective certainly with the likes of Garnacho, Højlund and Rashford up front, does lead to United having virtually no control of the game, and we've constantly seen the effect of this throughout this season, with the games against Galatasaray and Wolves probably the best examples. Now I am planning to do a separate video looking at how Ten Hag could potentially solve this issue using Garnacho in what some phases of play would be at the top of a midfield diamond, but I'll save that for the future video, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when that comes out. But whatever tactical adaptations, if any, Ten Hag looks to make to his possession system, it has to enable United to play against deep compact defensive units and be able to use attacking patterns of play in order to create chances in the final third, because ultimately this is what's going to lead to United being less focused on transitioning the attack quickly and give them more control in the game, which is going to be absolutely essential, to any title challenge over the course of a whole season. And if you watch my unreleased video on my Patreon, which will be linked in the description, you can get a 7-day free trial, you'll see that the possession system and the ability to break down opposition defensive systems, whether this be in the build-up phase or in the middle third, is a main reason as to why I really like Roberto De Zerbi. And from a tactical side, I definitely think Ten Hag is capable of making these adaptations, because he's not exactly a tactically rigid manager like a Conte or a Mourinho, and so I do expect him to be able to not just see these issues, but also fix them pretty much before the end of the season. But even if Ten Hag is able to make tactical adaptations to solve these issues, there could still be quite a bit of conflict between the INEOS regime and Ten Hag himself, and this is where we come on to the concession that Ten Hag's going to have to make, because with the likes of Omar Barada, Dan Ashworth, and even someone like Paul Mitchell coming into United's hierarchy, I think you have to give them as much control over the recruitment and transfers as possible, and so whoever the Manchester United manager is over the summer and going into next season, they are going to have to conform with this INEOS director of football model. And for Ten Hag himself, I think this means he's going to have to give up his transfer veto. If you're not familiar with what the transfer veto is, basically the way United were operating over last summer and the summer before is that Ten Hag would essentially get final say on which players were actually brought into the club. And if he disagreed with any transfers that were coming in, he had a veto which basically meant that he could stop the transfer from happening. However, even Ten Hag's biggest fans have to admit that when it comes to player recruitment, it's been pretty much abysmal from him. With the signings of Antony, Casemiro, even Mason Mount, Amrabat as well, at best being expensive signings who don't really have a clear defined role in Ten Hag's system, and at worst in the case of Antony being just nowhere near good enough. And when you factor in Ten Hag's decision to get rid of players like James Garner, Alvaro Fernandez, and Anthony Elanga, and keep players like Facundo Pellistri, Antony, and whoever else you want to put into this category, I think it's obvious that he pretty much has to cease his power when it comes to recruitment, hand it over to Dan Ashworth and those above him, and basically function in the role of a head coach, where his job is basically to set up the side tactically and manage the squad of players on the pitch, rather than having a say on the recruitment and the squad building as a whole. But before I come on to the managers that I think United should avoid, if you want to hear my unfiltered early thoughts on who would be the top candidates to replace Ten Hag as manager, I have released a Patreon podcast. You can get a 7-day free trial. I basically just give my off-the-cuff thoughts on managers like De Zerbi, Nagelsmann, as well as some others as well, basically just looking at who's leading my list at the moment. Obviously the video I do on my YouTube channel will be in greater depth, but if you just want a quick idea of what I'm thinking, check out the Patreon. You can of course get the 7-day free trial. But now we come on to the managers that I think United should avoid. Well, firstly, Hansi Flick is a big no from me. I think people who are seriously suggesting Hansi Flick can only be casuals, because it's patently obvious that Flick's success at Bayern, whilst definitely not something that should be overlooked, was hugely dependent on the players he had at his disposal. And after watching his Germany side as well, it suggests to me that a lot of his tactical ideas are centred around that late 2010s Bayern team. For example, the high line he played was hugely dependent on the pace and recovery ability of centre-backs Boateng and Alaba, alongside the world-class 1v1 shot-stopping ability of Manuel Neuer. He also had Kimmich and Davies, who were probably two of the best fullbacks in world football in possession at the time, and Bayern were hugely dependent on Alphonso Davies having the attacking output of a top-level winger down the left side, which is incredibly hard to replicate unless he or Theo Hernandez are in the side. Factor in the world-class qualities of Thiago, Lewandowski and Gnabry that year, and whilst his success is still impressive, it's understandable as to why he struggled with Germany, because he didn't have those world-class players which his system was dependent on. I just don't think Flick is ready for a job like Manchester United or Barcelona, or even going back to Bayern. I think he's got to go somewhere like RB Leipzig or Borussia Dortmund and develop his tactical style further. Thomas Tuchel is another I'd avoid. He was without doubt one of the best tactical managers around up until about 2021-22, where like Ten Hag and Pochettino, I feel like he's failed to adapt to the changing tactical meta. A few years ago, particularly in the Premier League, the standard of defensive tactical setup that top sides would face was a level below, but now I feel like it's not just enough to transition into a set possession shape. We also need to develop the right attacking patterns of play and positional rotations in order to counter the opposition's narrow organised defensive setup, in order to drag players out of position and create the space for yourself, having players arrive in the space rather than just standing there statically, from where it becomes easy for the opposition to defend against. I think we started to see this issue occurring towards the back end of his Chelsea spell, and this has also been a huge problem for Tuchel at Bayern, where his side drop into a 3-2-5 possession shape, but have very little positional rotations or set attacking patterns of play, which, as he found out against Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen a few weeks ago, makes it simple for opposition managers to prepare for, and if the defensive system is organised and well executed, it seems to be able to stop Tuchel's Bayern being able to progress the ball into dangerous areas, becoming hugely reliant on the qualities of individuals like Musiala, Kane and Sane to create and score. Tuchel at United for me runs into a lot of the same problems that Ten Hag has had. For me, Tuchel's just not right for a lot of top clubs, including United, and that's not even factoring in that he seems to fall out with a lot of boards that he works for, with Chelsea and PSG maybe being understandable, but even going back to his Dortmund days there was conflict. I think he should probably wait for one of the Inter Milan, AC Milan or Juventus jobs to come up, just because I think he'd be a lot more suited tactically to the Italian style of play. Maybe if Inzaghi gets headhunted by another elite club, that job opens up, Allegri could possibly go in the next year or so, and if Juventus don't go for Zidane, which I think they should, Tuchel would probably be second or third on their list. Same with AC Milan if Pioli moves on, but at least now anyway, none of those jobs are open, so if he wants to go straight back into management, I think the Napoli job would probably be the best out there, unless he wants to take a hit to his ego, which I think he needs to do, and go to a lower level Premier League club like Villa if Emery was to go elsewhere, or maybe even West Ham, but I don't see Tuchel doing that this summer anyway. Xavi Hernandez is another one I'd avoid, even though I do think he has the capabilities of adapting his tactical game and moving into that upper echelon of elite managers, but because he's only managed Barcelona whilst in Europe, for me it's just too much of a risk to assume he'd be able to do that as early as next season. Whilst his Barcelona side were very good, specifically defensively in La Liga last season, he, like Ten Hag, Tuchel, Pochettino and even Luis Enrique, still hasn't really shown he can incorporate the necessary attacking patterns of play or positional rotations in his tactical setup, which I think is essential for the next Manchester United manager to have. I think like Tuchel, Italy is probably Xavi's best option unless he's to go somewhere like Villa or West Ham, or maybe even to Portugal with Benfica or Sporting if their respective coaches were to move on as well, but for Manchester United, Xavi is a no from me. Now Graham Potter, despite being a manager who INEOS seem to like, I'd actually avoid him for United. I can see why they like him, as from a tactical point of view, I was very impressed with his Brighton side, and I do think purely from a tactical point of view, he's probably the best English manager around, but for me there are still questions over his management of big personalities, with his time at Chelsea being chaotic, but still underwhelming, and so even though he crashed and burned at Chelsea, I think if he goes somewhere like West Ham, Forest if they stay up, or even maybe Brentford if Thomas Frank was to go elsewhere, after 2 or 3 seasons I think he can then look for a big job in the Premier League, but at the moment I just think it's too early for him. So those are all the managers I think United should avoid. I am now working on who should be on United's candidate list, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when that video comes out. If you do want to hear my thoughts currently on all those managers that will be on the candidate list, check out my Patreon podcast. You can get a 7-day free trial. I'll leave it linked in the description, but I will be working on that video in the next few days, and so even if you do listen to that podcast episode, the video that actually comes out on my YouTube channel will go into it in a lot more depth. So thank you for watching. If you liked that video, check out some of my others, which I will leave linked in the eye above and in the description below.